Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Nickel, and I have Miss America here, and Gaston, and as usual, Tony he'll be up later. Makes this, wants to be fashionably late. I named this Facebook Live event Cats Who Are Stuck in the Mud because it's not like they're not fun or they're not, party animals, but the truth is that it takes a different kind of love to bring out the inner snuggle bunny in a cat, and some are going to be more amenable to it than others. So this is just a discussion of social behavior in cats and how you can bring out what you want in a cat and where the limitations are. The truth is, cats are social creatures, but they've been often called socially asocial, meaning that they are certainly capable of social interactions, but they don't really need them. Unlike dogs and people, very, very few cats are going to live, let me put it differently, very few dogs and people are going to live on their own. We bring together our resources, we protect them together, we gather them together. Dogs hunt and look for carrion to eat together. But cats are typical loners in most everything that they do. The females in a colony will often look after the young together, but for the most part, unless they're raising young, they're pretty solitary creatures. Now I don't even have, see, solitary creatures, they're both gone, but they'll be back. So, look boys, I have cat food for you if you want to come up here. So, anyway, point is this, that what I want to do is talk about how do we work with a cat. I mean, they're not little people in furry suits. We love them that way. But they're not dogs with short ears either. Many of their internal systems are different. Behaviorally, they're pretty darn different. While dogs and humans have a great deal in common, cats and humans much less so. I mean, it's remarkable that they make such excellent pets so much of the time, but things do have to be on their terms, and that is an important reason for that, is that we humans, again, we work together, but we work for a leader. There's Tony. We work for a leader who can give us money or food in exchange for our productivity, and dogs will do the same. They look to their leaders as the controllers of the resources that are key to their survival. Cats, on the other hand, don't really need us for that. That isn't why they live with us and why they love us and why they're bonded to us. They're not looking for a paycheck from us at all. They are invited into our homes by us, and they adapt to whatever that home situation is, and it's a lot easier for them when they're young than when they're older. But once they're part of that household and they're quite comfortable with it, then they tend to want to keep it just the way it is. Change is not most cats' friend. They're just not that adaptable to moving to a new house or to taking in new creatures into the home, especially different cats once they get older. Well, all this goes back to the very beginnings. We now know with some very recent and robust research that genetics plays a very big part in who a cat is and what they're capable of adapting to as they get older. So, for example, if we have a cat who is just not genetically programmed for social behavior, they may not get along with other cats very well, and they may not have much interest in people. And so, for example, if you find a feral cat that you want to adopt, sometimes they actually do fit into a home, and you think, well, gee, I didn't think a feral cat could adapt so well. I must be some kind of a little cat manager, and you may be. But it may have more to do with the cat and how that cat started out from the very beginning genetically. On the other hand, feral cats are at a real disadvantage as a broad rule in terms of their capability of becoming pets. We know from other research that the development of the cat's brain is such that between ages 2 and 7 weeks, they are amenable to becoming socialized with just about any species. I mean, you may have seen these pictures that folks send you on the internet of a cat with a bird sitting on its head, for example, and you think, well, that's photoshopped. Well, very often, no, that's not the case at all, because if you have a kitten between ages 2 and 7 weeks, and you teach that kitten that canaries are our friends, or mice are, we live with them, they're pets, and that's part of our life here, then that cat will accept that other species as part of its life, all of its life. And the same is true with other cats and with people. So one of the problems that we have, for example, when somebody finds a litter of 1 or 2 day old kittens and the mother is nowhere to be found, and we raise those little babies as orphans, bottle feed them and warm them up and all those essential things for their early development physically, if they don't have exposure to other cats, including adult cats, through those first several weeks, then that orphan-raised cat, all its life, may be deathly afraid of other cats, and that may be manifest by running and hiding or by becoming defensive aggressive towards other cats, and that is fairly common. And when those problems occur because of the exposures that a kitten got or did not get between ages 2 and 7 weeks, frankly, those cats are very often not much we can do to change them. So, what can you do? Well, let's talk a little bit about fear, because that's a huge factor with pets. When we got Tony here, he was about 10 weeks old, and I very carefully wanted to pick the right kitten for this family, because we keep our pets until they're real old and they can't go on. And so I found a family that had a litter of kittens. Interestingly, it turned out to be the same family who had the mother and father of Miss America, this border collie right here. And so when they answered my call and said, yes, we have kittens, I wanted a kitten who had been raised with dogs. Well, it turned out not only with dogs, but border collies. and with children, and had been indoors largely. And so he had the right exposures. And I expected him to do very well in our kind of a home. Well, sure enough, he did. He worked out just great. Now, Gaston over here came from an entirely different situation. One of my sons and I were walking Miss America here on the irrigation ditch one night, and we heard this little crying kitten. And we looked over, and there he was. The sun was just starting to set. It had just finished raining. And there he was on the bank of the irrigation ditch, and he was looking right at us and talking to us. So, of course, we went over and picked him up, and we couldn't find his... Anne, hello, thank you so much for tuning in. And yes, Charlotte, your cat is definitely social, but there are some things... That's right. I know, if you could only go back and expose her to other things. No question. And you can't. That's the thing with most cats. It's once the socialization window is closed when they're youngsters, frankly, that in most cases that ship has sailed. Nonetheless, we can still work with it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So here was Gaston, just a little guy, probably 8-10 weeks old, on the bank of the irrigation ditch. So we picked him up and hunted around the neighborhood and tried to find his family, and there was nobody to be found. Of course, we put out signs with my private, closely guarded cell phone on it, and nobody called. So in our search for Gaston's home, of course, it turned out to be our home. But he's always been just a little bit skittish. You've got to be careful. If you move too quickly around him, he just takes off. It doesn't mean he doesn't love us, and it doesn't mean that he doesn't belong here, because he's a very social and a very affectionate kitty, although he's sometimes the guy who stands off to the side, and we have to respect that for who he is. Which is kind of the same thing we do with other people, isn't it? I mean, if you have a friend or a spouse or a significant other, and your children too, they're all different, and they all have their own needs, and we respect those. We recognize what they are. And so when we deal with a cat who is potentially a little bit nervous, we don't rush up and grab him. Let me tell you a little story. This was just last night. I have a 1974 Triumph TR6 sports car. I bought it as a graduation gift for myself when I graduated veterinary school in 1974. I've kept this car real nice, looks great, runs great. It's been a great car all these years, and I enjoy it as much as I ever have. It needed a new alternator. So I took the old alternator out, and I ordered one, and it came in, and last night I was doing some work under the hood to fit that new alternator in its place, and concentrating on what I was doing. I'd finished my work, and I was just taking a little time to enjoy my car in the garage, and I hear a noise. Well, you don't expect that. And I was startled. I mean, it just came out of the blue, and I whipped around, and there's this young man coming through my open garage door, and he was approaching me. And I said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Well, he had a foreign accent of some kind, and he was wearing a badge of some sort, and he was selling something. But I was, frankly, kind of jangled. I was, unnerved by this thing. And I expected him to stop and tell me why he was here. And I asked him, I said, "Why are you here?" And he just kept coming toward me. Well, wasn't a big guy. And, in retrospect, there wasn't anything really particularly threatening about him. But the state of mind that I was in at that moment was the adrenaline-driven fight or flight because I'd been startled. And when you experience that kind of thing, just, well, of course, out of the blue, it wouldn't be a startle had I expected him. It's easy to start having empathy for others, including members of other species, because we can do things in their lives with us that they don't expect, that may not be necessarily consistent with members of what their species do, and it can damage the relationship, and it can also make it really hard to bring out of them the behavior and the relaxed and peaceful emotional state that we're trying to promote. Well, this young man, probably early 20s, he kept approaching me in my garage, and I was still kind of unnerved. And we know physiologically what happens. We know that when the fear center of the brain releases adrenaline, it literally overwhelms the thinking, cognitive part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. It makes it nearly impossible to actually think clearly in that first couple of seconds after you get that surge of adrenaline. And I just said, "Look, I don't want you here." He kept coming towards me, and I said, "No, you have to leave. If a person is going to invade my personal space in my personal house, I'm not interested." And so I sent him away. I didn't want to be rude, but it wasn't working for me. Well, here's what can happen with pets, cats and dogs. And it doesn't have to be an unfamiliar person who frightens them and puts them in that emotional state. It can be one of us, one of their people, who inadvertently triggers their fear by rushing up to them, reaching for them when they're not expecting it, and triggering a fear response. And in some individuals, it happens more easily than others. And with Tony here, and I'd like to say, oh, it's because the Nickel family raised him like, of course, we're real good at that stuff. Well, the truth is I'm residency trained in behavior medicine. I do know about these things. But yeah, we were lucky too. And part of that was that very clearly he was genetically programmed to be a social cat and not easily frightened. But Gaston over here is doing his little imitation of a chicken. He's different, very possibly genetically. But his first several weeks, ages 2 to 7, before we got him, he may not have had much exposure to people. And there isn't any really changing that. And so what do you do with a cat like that? Well, the best thing you can do is lure that cat. And if I had a couple of cat treats in my hand, I'd demonstrate how to lure a cat. It's not the same as the kind of lure you put on your fishing rod. Well, Tony, here, baby. And I don't have to approach a cat if I've got something they really want, and they'll come for it. And, food is a pretty simple thing. In Gaston's case, he wasn't quite coming to my hand, so I just dropped them on the table, and he might come a little bit closer. Here you go, Gaston. There you go. And while they're preoccupied having this food, I can teach them that getting petted around the head and neck and shoulders, which is really the only place that cats want to get petted, because genetically that's how they interact with other cats in their colony, grooming, mutual grooming around the head, neck, and shoulders. So we give it to them their way, in the feline specific way. So here's a letter that I got from a reader of my newspaper column that I put in my website every Tuesday morning, or send out actually to my subscribers. Fairly brief, so stick with me. There's a takeaway from here, because this is such a well-meaning person. And this has happened to be a man who wrote this. I remember because of his name. And he said, "I was at my mother's house for her birthday." It turns out she lived in one of these nice upscale trailer parks. And there was this, and he was a smoker, by the way. He was out on her porch having a cigarette. And I had to edit this down because otherwise there's too much verbiage to put in a newspaper column. I was at my mother's for her birthday, and there was this beautiful cat on her porch. I petted and loved on her, and then I learned she was a stray in the trailer park. Well, Mom suggested I take her home, seeing that I'm a big cat lover and already have 3 calicos. She is eating and drinking in my apartment. Notice apartment as opposed to the great outdoors, but stays close to my door. She will come to me when I calls her Cleo, very sweet name, but she seems to be grieving. She ignores my cats unless they come around a corner, but then it's just a small hiss. Did I make a mistake in rescuing her? She lets me hold her and pet her, and she purrs every time I touch her. My response, well, you're certainly kind to try to help, Cleo. The problem is that cats who have lived in one place for a long time become highly bonded to their territory. Your indoor cats are the same way about their home, and they can't stand that cute newcomer. Taking Cleo out of her element and adding her to an established feline colony, and they feel about the other cats in their human domicile as they would about other cats in their free living colony. Taking Cleo out of her element and adding her to your established feline colony has been stressful for everybody. There are ways of trying to help this crowd accept your decision, but the upheaval may worsen. Long term, your kitties will be at increased risk of bladder disease, upper respiratory infections, fighting, and house soiling. Crowding is bad for cats. They like sardines, but they're nothing like sardines. Despite the outdoor hazards, Cleo will do best living back where she started. She'll have unlimited choices where and with whom she wants to spend time. Your apartment cats have adapted to their indoor life. None of these kitties wants change. They hate that feline four-letter word, change. My advice is to take Cleo back to her real home. You can improve her life by adding a raised, snug little kitty house so she can stay warm and safe. You look forward to bringing her special food and enjoying her company when you visit your mom. Sometimes it's painful doing what's best for others, but you're a person. You can adjust more easily than a stick-in-the-mud cat. Okay? So, once they've established what their habits are, where they live, and with whom, that's the way they want it. And so people who love cats, and you don't think about the needs of your cats, but, without realizing it consciously, you think about how much you love cats, and you have one or two or three, and you say, why not add more, like this man who wrote this letter? They can get crowded, and especially if they live inside. And the reason for that is that if they wanted to create distance from somebody who might be scaring them, or who they just can't stand because they're new, where the heck are they going to go? And so you can get this hissing like he was describing, or much worse, and nobody has a way of escaping. So think very much about what we would do for another person, what we would like others to do for us in terms of respecting our own needs. And we're individuals. I have needs that are different than somebody else's, and if we're going to get along well, we recognize those things and we respect those, and we have deference for each other's boundaries. But with members of another species, that's a bit more challenging because their needs are different than human needs. But cats, if you want them to flourish in your life, you wait for them to come, and you can lure them. But advancing and grabbing, not what they want any more than I wanted that from that young guy who was trying to sell me a magazine subscription in my garage last night. So let's see, who else showed up here? Ann Manners is here. If anybody, by the way, has any questions, I'm delighted to take them. And it doesn't have to be about cats and their special behavioral needs with respect to others encroaching on their boundaries. It could be about dogs. It could be about physical behavior, physical health of cats and dogs. It could be about the weather in Albuquerque. I'd be happy to talk about that. Fly fishing, just did some of that recently. My nice old sports car. I'll expound on that if you need me to. Otherwise, that's all I have to share tonight. And I want to thank you for tuning in. I'm going to post this on my Facebook page as usual, and I'm going to make one other point. By the way, today is June 20th. We're only a couple weeks away from Independence Day, and there's a lot of fireworks, especially in Albuquerque, and I bet there are other places too here in the United States, and they can be really, really scary. So let's talk about how that is for just a minute, if you don't mind sticking with me. Many dogs will cower and hide under furniture and tremble, and many cats, while they don't usually tremble, they'll hide out, and sometimes they'll spend more time with their person. And you can certainly comfort a scared pet, and that can be helpful. But there's other things that we can do about that. If you have an interior room, like a walk-in closet, for example, an interior room that doesn't have windows, you can make that real comfy. If it's a closet, it can be especially nice because your dog or your cat can get under the hanging clothes, and that's a den-like area. And one thing that cats and dogs have in common is they are denning creatures. They don't live in a den, but they spend their time there, especially when they need security. Noisy fans can help drown out the sound. The newer ones that are kind of shaped like a tower, and they're great and they're inexpensive and they hardly make any noise. You don't want those. They're not noisy enough. They're too quiet. Get these older fans, like the ones with in a rectangle, the big old propeller, and it makes a lot of racket like an old propeller-driven plane. You want those. Music can help too, but classical music they have found in cats and dogs is actually better than country and western or rap. Rock and roll isn't so bad. They've researched this. You can also get music that has been scientifically developed to be in synchrony with the brain waves of a dog, and other music that has been developed the same way for cats. And it's called Through a Dog's Ear and Through a Cat's Ear. And by the way, you can get that online. You can download it to your computer, or they'll send you a CD. You can play in a CD player. And these kinds of things can be very helpful. There are anti-anxiety medications that can be given as needed. Lorazepam, Lorazepam, is safe in cats and dogs. Your regular veterinarian can prescribe it. But for dogs in particular, there's an excellent, relatively new anti-anxiety medication called Sileo, S-I-L-E-O. And I'll be sure to put links in my Facebook page for these, by the way. You won't be able to order the lorazepam on your own because, again, it's a prescription medication, nor the Sileo, but your veterinarian can either dispense it or order it for you, and you can pick it up there. But the neat thing about Sileo is that it's not an injectable, but it comes in a syringe with a soft tip, and it's a gel that is meant to be put between the lower lip and the gum. So when I give it to Miss America here, who does have a problem with loud noises, I slide it right back, right where my finger is there, and you just inject that little blob in there to make it easy for her. I put a little almond butter on the end of the syringe, so she thinks it's pretty cool. You hold her mouth closed and her nose up for a couple of minutes, and that absorbs across the mucous membranes, across the gums and the lip, and in about 20 minutes it's effective. It's unlike most anti-anxiety as-needed medications. If you give it ahead of the problem, it usually works well, but if you give it after the pet's already agitated and frightened, most of those aren't that helpful. But with Sileo, this gel, it's actually pretty darn good, even if you've forgotten to give it before the fireworks start. And it lasts for a couple of hours, and then you can redose it if you need to. So S-I-L-E-O, Sileo. It has not been researched in cats, although there is some information on its use, and it's not an altogether bad thing in cats. But I'm not going to officially recommend it in cats because it's not FDA approved for use in the species. But if your veterinarian wanted to adjust the dose for your cat, it actually works okay in cats. Avoidance of the arousal stimulus, trying to keep the pet away from the flashes and the noise, mask the noise, give them a real secure hideout, and a food toy, something like that to keep them focused, and a anti-anxiety medication so they can get through it. So I hope that's valuable too. So please tune in next week, and we're going to talk a little bit about helping a jittery, nervous dog. What I'll be discussing is dogs who are just sort of anxious a lot of the time. And yeah, there are always medications, and in some cases that is very helpful. This won't be about pharmacology, though. This is going to be about what you can do personally, one-on-one with that pet, and how you can set an emotional example for relaxation. It's kind of fun, and it'll be good for you too. And it looks like I have one more question here. Oh, Marisha, thank you for all you well, you're very welcome. I know I mentioned this last week too. When people give me those positive reinforcers, I sort of know how dogs and cats feel when they've done the right thing and their person tells them how good they are. We all work for those kinds of reinforcers. I don't care what species you are. And so thanks, I appreciate that. So until next week, thanks again for tuning in. And by the way, if you like this Facebook Live on Tuesday morning, and every week's Facebook Live, and every week's media column from the newspaper, I post that every Tuesday morning. And all you need to do to get it in your email box is to go to my website, which is drjeffnickel.com, DRJEFF. Now, if you jump off, you're going to disturb the tripod, girlfriend, so give it just a second here. drjeffnicol.com. And you can subscribe, and it costs nothing. And when you do, I'll send you my free at-home pet first aid and CPR guide. So thank you again for tuning in. I hope you show up next week, and have a great weekend.